Thank you so much, Judy. I love you. Good evening, everyone. I'm so very proud and overwhelmed to be this year's recipient of the Make a Difference Award. I first want to apologize for not being there with you in person. I'm afraid that this evening coincided with two events, one professional and the other my nephew's 3rd birthday. I missed last year's birthday for reasons everyone here is all too familiar with, and I promised I'd never miss another, so I hope you'll forgive me. I'm so grateful to the foundation and to the Shepard family for this distinct honor. When I was told I could accept the award virtually, I leapt to accept it immediately, because this acknowledgement in particular, from this family, this foundation bearing the name of this young man, Matthew Shepard, means a great deal to me personally. See, I've thought about two gay men at least once a day for almost 30 years, Pedro Zamora and Matthew Shepard. Every Pride event, every LGBT cultural milestone, every gain we've made and those we continue to press for, I think of them. I speak to them. I say their names. Because there, but for the grace of God, go I. See, I'm only 3 years older than Matt would have been today. We were both born in December, Matt on the 1st, and me on the 27th. I, too, at the time, would have been described as Matt was by some of his friends, part actor, part politician. We were part of the same generation of LGBTQ young people in the 90s who, in the face of an earlier pandemic and the ignorance and hate that accompanied it, were navigating growing up, accepting who we were, exploring our sexuality and fear, and finding a way to survive. All the while fighting, some of us in our small towns and some in the big cities, to have our humanity as LGBTQ people be seen by others. And because of the relentless barrage of homophobia coming at us from what seemed like every direction at the time, to recognize and celebrate our own humanity. This was and is a generation who chooses to live out loud despite the death and understandable fear surrounding our entire adolescence and young adulthood. We were not going to die slow, silent deaths. We were not going to let hate win. We were going to stand up and choose to fight for our lives, our love. We were kids, but we were going to change the world by coming out, telling our stories, surviving. There was a part of me that felt there was a shift at the time. Perhaps it was just youthful naivete, but something I thought was changing. I was 24 years old when Matt was killed. It was only 4 years after my so-called life aired, and I was finishing up my run in the Broadway cast of Rent. LGBTQ people were coming out on National Coming Out Day on Oprah Winfrey's nationally syndicated show in front of millions. And new antiretroviral drugs had just been introduced, and we were just beginning to feel something that seemed so elusive for so long: hope. I was daring myself to feel hope. And then, on October 12th, 1998, one day after National Coming Out Day, Matt died. And I understood, perhaps for the first time in my life, that the moral arc of the universe may indeed bend towards justice. But Dr. King never said it was a direct flight. The media coverage was wall to wall, and many outlets couldn't help themselves and tried to smear Matt's name and blame and shame him and the LGBTQ community simultaneously. I felt that. I really had believed that we'd made so much more progress. And I couldn't help but feel like I had failed in some way to change enough hearts and minds as Ricky Vasquez on My So-Called Life. I was disillusioned. Many of us were. A couple of decades before, we would have been beaten back and retreated into the closets, but instead, there was grace in the form of the Shepard family, armed with love, and so instead, we were defiant. People from all over this country began to tell their stories, and just as importantly, LGBTQ people's families and friends began to share their stories of allyship with the LGBTQ people they loved. No, Matt wasn't the first LGBTQ person beaten and killed because of who they were or who they love. So many of us, especially those in queer communities of color and trans and non-binary communities, had and continue to see heinous acts of violence acted upon us regularly, mostly without notice. The number of trans women of color killed in this country and around the world alone should shame us all into action. But in 1998, with Matt's murder and the Shepard family's heart-wrenching pleas for understanding, perhaps because they could more easily identify with him, this nation's people could not look away and were forced to look within their own hearts, their own families, their own close circles, and see their own Matt Shepards and the precariousness and danger they lived in simply for being who they are. Matt changed me too. I'd already known the power of telling our stories. I'd seen firsthand the powerful change that kind of vulnerability can possess. I knew that I had an opportunity to use my own visibility and my own gifts to speak to our lives, our loves, to our dreams and desires. I understood that, for whatever reason, I had been allowed to live when these two men had not, and that I had a responsibility to continue their work of changing the world for however long I was allowed to remain. So with every role, from there on, from Party of Five, The West Wing, to Grey's Anatomy, from Party Monster to today on Star Trek Discovery, where my partner, played by Anthony Rapp, and I are boldly going into the future, creating a chosen family unit with our trans and non-binary charges. I've chosen to use my platform to shine a light on us and who we really are. A beautiful rainbow of people, celebrating and exemplifying diversity and creativity, expanding, defining, and redefining all of the beautiful ways humanity can show and grow love in the world. That's who we are. That's who we've always been. That is our service to humanity, and it takes every single one of us to do that work. And we know now, after losing Matt and too many more, that we will not sacrifice even one of us to get it done. And so that is why we're here tonight, to commit ourselves to continue that work. It's why I'm so humbled to receive this acknowledgement, and why I hope you take the opportunity tonight to support this family and this foundation that has committed itself in the name of their beloved to, in their words, quote unquote, inspire individuals, organizations, and communities to embrace the dignity and equality of all people. Amen.